Welcome to the African Strata, where every layer tells a new story. Support the channel. Like, subscribe, and share for more real African stories.
If a military leader brings you clean water, security, and food, does it matter that you never voted for him? That's not a hypothetical. It's happening right now in Burkina Faso, one of the poorest nations on earth. No elections, no opposition, no free press. But somehow, more progress in 24 months than some democracies managed in decades. Captain Ibrahim Traoré took power in a coup. No campaign, no promises. Just boots, rifles, and a message. The people are suffering. We are taking responsibility. Most of the world scoffed. Another uniform, another regime, another African failure waiting to happen. Except it didn't fail. Attacks dropped. Schools reopened. Crops grew. And trust, real, tangible trust, started spreading again. So now the question isn't just, what is he doing? It's far harder. What if he's doing it right? And if that's true, then maybe the real danger isn't Ibrahim Traoré. Maybe it's the world that can't admit what he exposes. That democracy isn't delivering like it used to. That power, when unfiltered, might get results faster. That in some corners of the world, freedom isn't the first thing people ask for. It's the last thing they can afford to wait for. So here's your first uncomfortable question. Would you rather be free or fed? Before you answer, watch what comes next. Ibrahim Traoré didn't wait for permission. He walked in, took power, and acted like he'd always had it. No speeches about democracy, no half-hearted promises about elections. Just action, fast, sharp, unapologetic. He was 34, young enough to be called reckless, calm enough to look dangerous. To his critics, he's just another military dictator, dressed in modern PR and Pan-African rhetoric. To his supporters, he's the first leader in decades who actually did something besides beg for aid or host summits. Neither side is completely wrong, and that's exactly what makes him so hard to define. Because when a man with no electoral mandate starts producing tangible results, every label starts to lose weight. If he's a dictator, he's a productive one. If he's a hero, he's an unelected one. And if he's both? Then maybe the categories themselves no longer fit the world we're watching. That's why Traoré doesn't just divide opinions, he exposes them, forces people to pick a side in a fight they didn't think they'd need to have. Legitimacy versus effectiveness, ideals versus outcomes. And when those things collide, which one do you let win? Think about it before the world decides for you. What does real progress look like? A functioning election or a functioning school? Burkina Faso hasn't seen a ballot since 2022, but classrooms are open. Farmers are growing more. Attacks are down. Maternal deaths are dropping. And none of it came from foreign consultants or multi-year plans. This wasn't the model. It wasn't endorsed. And yet, it's working. Not perfectly, not forever, but enough to make people question. If a government without permission delivers better than one with global approval, what exactly are we defending? Now look around. Democratic states are struggling to hold trust. Riots in France, grid failures in South Africa, paralysis in Washington. Meanwhile, a country most had written off is doing something dangerous. It's working quietly. Progress used to be about results. Then it became about process. Now we're stuck in systems that can't deliver either. So here's the question no institution wants you to ask. Is a flawed system that feeds its people worse than a flawless one that doesn't? Burkina Faso is making progress, and almost no one in the West wants to talk about it. No front-page stories, no G7 statements, no UN spotlights. In fact, the more the country shows signs of working, the quieter the international response becomes. France, once the colonial power here, was quick to condemn the coup until their troops were expelled and replaced by local security forces. Then came silence. Not even Le Monde or France 24 followed up with consistent reporting on the post-coup recovery. Why? Because acknowledging Burkina Faso's success would mean admitting that France's presence had failed to deliver it. The US wasn't any clearer. When asked about Traoré's regime, the State Department said they were monitoring developments and urging a return to democratic norms. That was mid-2023. Since then, nothing concrete. No sanctions, no aid boosts, no public position. Reuters ran a short piece in late 2024 highlighting Burkina Faso's agricultural rebound, but it didn't make headlines. The Economist published an op-ed titled "Progress Without Permission," questioning whether the West's obsession with elections had blinded it to results. The article was shared but mostly in Africa, not Europe. Even watchdog groups stepped back. Freedom House listed Burkina Faso as not free in their 2025 index, but buried the note that violent incidents had dropped by 54% compared to the previous year. Human Rights Watch mentioned forced relocations during security operations, but skipped the unprecedented return of 100,000 internally displaced people to their home regions in 2024. So what's going on? The model isn't supposed to work. That's the problem. Because if Traoré succeeds without Western guidance, it sets a precedent. It tells other nations they don't need lectures to build, that they can walk away from the old frameworks and maybe even do better. And for governments that spent decades exporting democracy as their brand, that's not just inconvenient, that's dangerous. Because the more Traoré works, the more he exposes something few want to admit. Maybe the world's loudest defenders of progress aren't upset because he's failing. Maybe they're scared because he's not. And when silence is that loud, you have to ask, what truth are they trying not to say out loud? Traoré may be getting results, but he's doing it inside a system with no exits. There are no term limits. No elections scheduled. No independent media challenging him daily. No clear plan for what comes after him or what happens if he goes too far. This isn't just theory. In December 2024, Burkina Faso's transitional charter was quietly revised to give the presidency extended emergency powers, not temporary ones open-ended. Local media outlets like Radio Omega were suspended for undermining national unity. International press? Heavily restricted access? According to Reporters Without Borders, Burkina Faso dropped 17 places in the Global Press Freedom Index in just 1 year. And while supporters point to safety in schools, critics on the ground say fear is rising in different ways, not from terrorists but from unchecked authority. Civil society groups must now register through the Ministry of Territorial Administration. Several NGOs were forced to shut down after refusing to align with government security protocols. There's no clear appeal process. No independent oversight. The deeper question is this: what happens when power becomes efficient but untouchable? What happens when the leader people once trusted becomes the one no one can question? We've seen this movie before. A leader rises with purpose, with clarity, with real impact, but then something shifts. Praise turns to silence. Silence turns to obedience. And before anyone notices, the country forgets how to say no. That's the paradox of strong leadership. It solves problems fast, but removes the brakes just as quickly. So here's your dilemma now. If the system you admire today refuses to share power tomorrow, will you still call it progress? Or will you wait until it's too late to speak? Not everyone wants democracy. Some just want stability, food, safety, a chance to live without fear of being killed, starved, or forgotten. In Burkina Faso, that's what many people are choosing, not in theory, but in real life, every day. According to a 2025 Afrobarometer poll, over 62% of respondents in rural regions supported Traoré's continued rule, even without elections. Why? Because for the first time in years they feel seen. One farmer in Kodougou told Junafrique, "We don't need politicians who promise, we need someone who protects." A teacher in the Sahel region said, "There is calm now, our children are learning. That's enough for me." And maybe that's the part the West keeps misunderstanding. Democracy for them is a right, but for others, it's a luxury. Something you fight for after you've survived. Not before. People who've lived through war, hunger, displacement, they don't measure legitimacy by ballots. They measure it by breakfast, by whether their kids come home safe at night. Of course, that's not an excuse for authoritarianism, but it is a warning. Don't project your political expectations onto people whose lives don't look like yours. Because when survival is the baseline, ideals take a back seat. And in that gap, someone like Traoré doesn't look like a dictator. He looks like a solution. Now ask yourself, if you were in their shoes, what would you really ask for first? Freedom or firewood, food and safety? That question has no clean answer, but it's the one we keep skipping. You can feel the divide forming. On one side, people who say democracy is non-negotiable, no matter the outcomes. On the other, those who believe that if a system feeds, protects, and builds, then it deserves to exist, regardless of how it began. This isn't just an academic debate. It's emotional, it's personal, and it's tearing through the global comment sections like wildfire. Human rights advocates warn, today it's progress. Tomorrow it's power without limits. They point to the familiar pattern: early success, followed by tightening control, then decades of rule. The concern isn't just about Traoré, it's about the precedent. But others fire back. Where were you when the elected governments let terrorists run entire provinces? Where were your standards when democracy delivered nothing but fear? And neither side is lying. The truth is ugly. A functioning dictatorship can outdeliver a broken democracy. That doesn't mean it's right, but pretending it's not happening doesn't make it less real. So now you have to choose. Do you cling to a system because it's righteous, even when it fails? Or do you embrace a model that works but risks becoming unaccountable? There's no easy answer, but silence is still a choice. So here's the line. Do you protect the process or protect the people? You won't be able to do both forever. Burkina Faso might just be the beginning. Because if Traoré succeeds sustainably, visibly, undeniably, then why wouldn't others follow? Already murmurs are rising across the Sahel. Mali and Niger have echoed similar military transitions. Leaders there are watching carefully. Not just what Traoré says, but what he survives. If the international community tolerates his model, if his people keep supporting him, then the blueprint is out there. And it's contagious. This isn't theoretical. In March 2025, a senior official from Guinea was quoted in Le Monde Afrique saying, "What matters is security and sovereignty, not imported labels." That same month, ECOWAS quietly suspended pressure on junta-led countries to restore civilian rule. The message? The old rules don't hold anymore. And here's where it gets deeper. This isn't just about Africa breaking away from the West politically. It's about psychological independence, a new narrative one where local solutions replace foreign blueprints, where national pride isn't tied to compliance with global institutions, but to defiance of them. But if that movement spreads, it doesn't just shift regional dynamics. It fractures the very logic of the post-Cold War world, that liberal democracy is the endgame, the default, the only legitimate system left standing. Because what if it's not? What if a new block of non-democratic, locally legitimized regimes rises not with repression, but with results? What happens to the institutions built on the assumption that they'd never have competition? The West fears violence, but what it may fear more is efficiency coming from the wrong hands. So if Traoré's model spreads, the challenge won't be military, it'll be moral. And in that battle, ballots may not be enough. The biggest risk with strong men isn't how they take power, it's how they never give it back. And right now, nothing inside Traoré's system guarantees that he ever will. There are no exit plans, no successor pipeline, no civilian transition dates. In fact, the longer he succeeds, the less incentive there is to step aside. After all, who replaces the man who fixed what everyone else broke? History knows this story too well. Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary icon, was beloved for reforms, then silenced by a bullet. Paul Kagame brought Rwanda from genocide to global respect, but has never held a truly open election. Ethiopia's Meles Zenawi built infrastructure and education, then jailed dissenters and died in power. It always starts with trust, then urgency, then results. But somewhere in the curve, accountability vanishes and legacy replaces law. And that's the trap Traoré could be walking into. Not because he's malicious, but because unchecked power doesn't need malice to become permanent. It just needs momentum. Right now, his people support him. But support isn't a structure. Popularity isn't a constitution, and military control isn't a safeguard. It's a spotlight with no place to hide when things go wrong. So here's the final tension. What happens when the only man holding everything together becomes the reason it all might fall apart? Because if Traoré doesn't plan to leave, then everything he builds risks collapsing the moment he's no longer in command. And if history has taught us anything, it's this. Strong men don't usually fall. Systems around them do. You won't get to avoid this question forever. Not in Burkina Faso. Not in your own country. Not in a world where systems are cracking faster than they can be repaired. Because sooner or later you'll have to choose between a leader who delivers and one who follows the rules, between a government that listens and one that works, between ideals you were taught to defend and results you can't afford to ignore. Traoré isn't just a political figure, he's a mirror. He shows us everything we claim to value and everything we're willing to compromise when we're desperate. You don't have to like him. You don't have to believe in his model, but you do have to admit what it reveals, that faith in systems is easy when they're working and meaningless when they aren't. So maybe the final question isn't about Traoré at all. Maybe it's about you. When faced with chaos, would you reach for freedom first, or for the hand that stops the bleeding? Because once you answer that, you'll understand why some people are still calling him dangerous, and why others are quietly hoping he doesn't fail.